And then when we take precession into account, you find something else very intriguing happening. First of all, you find that the exact orientation of the pyramids as it is today, and pretty much as it was when they're supposed to have been built 4,500 years ago.
For over 4 millennia, the Great Pyramid of Giza has stood as the ultimate monument to a king, trusting that its colossal stones would forever seal the story of a single pharaoh's power. But recently, as maverick researcher Graham Hancock applied the lens of modern science to its ancient geometry, he uncovered more than the empty chambers of a tomb. He discovered an impossible blueprint of the Earth itself, encoded in cold, hard numbers. What lies on that plateau, Hancock argues, is not an ancient tomb, but a silent hard drive of planetary data. And as our own technology finally becomes smart enough to read the file, it threatens to erase our entire understanding of the human past in the most profound way imaginable. The promise that was misunderstood. Millions of people travel from all over the world to a dry, sandy plateau in Egypt, and they come here to see the most famous ancient building on the entire planet, the Great Pyramid of Giza. For more than 100 years, the official story about this incredible structure has been taught in schools and written in books by Egyptologists, who are the expert scientists that study the history of ancient Egypt. This story is very simple, and it tells us that a powerful king, a pharaoh named Khufu, ordered the construction of the Great Pyramid almost 4,500 years ago so that it could become his magnificent tomb after he died. This is the promise that the pyramid was supposed to represent, the promise of a final resting place for a king, and it is the story that almost everyone in the world has come to believe without question. But there is a writer and a journalist named Graham Hancock, and he has spent more than 30 years of his life investigating these ancient mysteries. And he believes that this entire story is a huge mistake. Graham Hancock is not a traditional Egyptologist, so he looks at the evidence with a completely different set of eyes. And what he has found has shocked people all around the globe. He states very clearly that the Great Pyramid of Giza was never built to be a tomb for any king. Instead, he argues that the structure is something far more intelligent and far more complex. Something that is much more like a giant, non-electronic computer made entirely out of stone. He believes the true purpose of the pyramid was not to celebrate a single person's life or death, but it was designed to hold and preserve a very special kind of information. A message written not in words, but in the universal language of mathematics and science. Graham Hancock claims that the proof for this incredible idea is not buried under the sand or hidden in some secret chamber, but it is right there in plain sight for anyone to see, encoded directly into the pyramid's very design. The real builders, he suggests, were not just powerful kings with thousands of workers, but they were master scientists who possessed an unbelievable level of knowledge. They knew things about our planet and our solar system that modern science has only rediscovered in the last few hundred years. But in order to prove that this structure is actually a massive storage device for ancient data, Hancock knows he must first prove what it is not. He must first show the world, with undeniable evidence, why this massive mountain of stone could never have been a tomb. The biggest clue that proves this is not found in what is inside the pyramid, but in what is missing, in the strange and deafening silence that greets you from within its ancient stone walls. The data of emptiness, when you leave the bright Egyptian sun and walk into the cool, dark passages of the Great Pyramid, you expect to find a world filled with the signs of a great king. Based on everything we know about ancient Egypt, a pharaoh's tomb was the most important building of all, and it was always decorated to show the king's power and to help his soul travel to the afterlife. In other famous tombs, like the tomb of Tutankhamun, the walls are completely covered with a special kind of ancient picture, writing called hieroglyphs. These hieroglyphs tell stories about the king, they show pictures of the gods, and they include powerful magic spells from a religious text called the Book of the Dead, which were all meant to protect the pharaoh on his journey after death. But when you walk through the long rising tunnel known as the Grand Gallery, or when you finally stand inside the main room called the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid, you are met with a shocking and profound silence. The massive granite walls are completely bare, with no carvings, no paintings, and no hieroglyphs anywhere to be seen, which is extremely unusual for a place believed to be a royal tomb. Inside the King's Chamber, there is a large stone box made of hard, red granite, and this box is called a sarcophagus. A sarcophagus was built for one single purpose: to hold the protected body, or mummy, of the king. Yet, this sarcophagus is just like the walls around it. It is completely plain and undecorated, with no name and no royal symbols carved into its surface. When modern explorers first entered this chamber, the sarcophagus was found completely empty, and there was no lid anywhere nearby. No mummy has ever been found inside the Great Pyramid, and there were no treasures, no furniture, and none of the golden artifacts that you would expect to find in the burial place of the most powerful king of his time. The official story says that ancient robbers must have stolen everything, but it is very difficult to believe that robbers could have removed every single object, and also scraped every single word and picture from the walls. The only direct evidence that connects Pharaoh Khufu to this entire pyramid comes from a few simple markings painted in red ochre. These marks are not grand carvings, but look more like ancient graffiti that workers might have scribbled on the stones. And these markings were not even found in the main chambers that people could visit, but they were discovered in small, hidden spaces high above the king's chamber, rooms that were sealed off and never meant to be entered. They were found in the year 1837 by a British explorer named Colonel Howard Vyse, who used gunpowder explosives to blast his way into these sealed chambers. For Graham Hancock and other researchers, this single, controversial piece of evidence is not nearly strong enough to prove that Khufu built the entire structure. The complete emptiness of the pyramid, he argues, is not a sign of a robbery. Instead, it is the most important clue of all, because it is telling us that this building's purpose was never about a person, and its message was not meant to be read with words. The message, Hancock insists, is hidden in the very shape and size of the building itself, and it was written in a language that anyone in the future could understand: the language of numbers, the signature of the mathematicians. Since the Great Pyramid is not filled with words or pictures, Graham Hancock believes that the real message must be found within the very measurements and angles of the building itself. When modern engineers and mathematicians began to study the pyramid's dimensions with great precision, they discovered something that was so surprising it seemed completely impossible. The pyramid appeared to contain some very special and important numbers that are fundamental to science and mathematics, numbers that the ancient Egyptians were not supposed to have known. These special numbers are called mathematical constants, which means they are always the same, and they are found everywhere in the design of the universe. Finding them inside the pyramid is like finding a signature from someone who had a very advanced understanding of how the world works, a signature left behind by master mathematicians. The first number they found is one of the most famous numbers in all of science, called pi. Pi is a special number, approximately 3.14, that is used to understand circles. To find pi, you must measure the distance all the way around a circle, which is called the circumference, and then divide it by the distance straight across the middle of the circle, which is called the diameter. When scientists measured the total distance around the four sides of the Great Pyramid's base, which is called the perimeter, and then divided that enormous number by 2 times the pyramid's original full height, the result they got was almost exactly pi For an ancient culture to have built this relationship into their monument with such accuracy is truly extraordinary. And many believe it could not have happened by accident. But the discoveries did not stop there, because they found a second special number also hidden in the pyramid's design. This number is called the golden ratio, or phi, which is approximately 1.618. The golden ratio is another important number found in nature, in art, and in geometry that describes a perfect and balanced shape. The builders of the pyramid encoded this number in a different way, because if you measure the length of the pyramid's slanting face from the ground to the very top, which is called the slant height, and then divide that number by half the length of one of the base sides, the number you get is almost a perfect match for the golden ratio. The chance of one of these numbers appearing by accident is extremely small, but for two of the most important numbers in mathematics to appear in the same structure is almost impossible. Graham Hancock argues that this is undeniable proof that the builders were sending a clear message, and they were using the universal language of mathematics to prove how advanced their knowledge was. They were showing us that they were not just simple builders, but were masters of science. But encoding these famous numbers was only the beginning, because they used this mathematical knowledge to do something that defies all explanation. They did not just use the pyramid to describe shapes, they used it to describe our entire world. The stone map of Earth. While finding advanced mathematics in the Great Pyramid is truly amazing, the builders did something even more unbelievable, something that challenges everything we thought we knew about the ancient world. They did not just use the pyramid's design to encode abstract numbers, but they used it to create an incredibly accurate map of our planet, the Earth. To do this, they created a very specific scale model, which means they made a much smaller version of a very large object. But they kept all the proportions exactly the same. The key to understanding this map is a single, very important number, which is 43,200. This number connects the size of the pyramid directly to the size of our world. And the builders used it with breathtaking precision in two different ways, proving that it could not have been a mistake. The first measurement they encoded was the height of the Earth. If you measure the distance from the exact center of our planet all the way up to the North Pole, you get a measurement called the polar radius. Scientists today know this is a very difficult number to calculate, and it requires advanced technology. Yet, if you take the original full height of the Great Pyramid, including the capstone that is now missing, and you multiply that height by the special number 43,200, the result you get is an almost perfect match for the polar radius of the Earth. This discovery is so shocking because it suggests that the builders knew the precise size of our planet from its core to its pole, a piece of information that should have been impossible for them to have. To prove this was not just a lucky coincidence, the builders used the same special number to map the width of our planet, the distance all the way around the Earth at its widest point. The equator is called the equatorial circumference. Again, this is a massive distance that can only be measured by surveying the entire globe. But if you measure the total distance around the four sides of the pyramid's base, which is called the perimeter, and you multiply that number by 43,200, you get a result that is almost exactly the same as the Earth's equatorial circumference. This means that the Great Pyramid is a perfect scale model of the northern half of our world. To get this kind of information, a civilization would have needed to travel all over the globe, using advanced science to measure the planet's curve. The number 43,200 is also not random, as it is directly connected to a very slow wobble that the Earth makes as it spins in space, a cycle that takes almost 26,000 years to complete, and is known as the precession of the equinoxes. The builders showed us what they knew about our planet with shocking clarity. But this only raises an even bigger question. How can we possibly know when they had this incredible knowledge? To find the answer, We must look away from the Earth and turn our eyes towards the stars. The timestamp in the stars. The Great Pyramid shows us what its builders knew about our planet. But the even bigger mystery is figuring out when they possessed this incredible knowledge. Since there are no dates written on the walls, Graham Hancock believes the builders left a very clever kind of clock for us to find. A clock that uses the slow movement of the stars and the long-term changes in the Earth's climate to point to a single, specific moment in the very distant past. The first part of this clock is found by looking at the layout of the three main pyramids on the Giza plateau. A researcher and engineer named Robert Bovell noticed that these three pyramids were not built in a perfectly straight line, and the third and smallest pyramid is noticeably offset to one side. For a long time, people thought this was just a mistake or a strange part of the design. But Robert Bovell realized it was a map of the sky. He saw that the layout of the three pyramids on the ground was a perfect mirror of the three bright stars that make up a famous star pattern called Orion's Belt. Just like the pyramids, the third star in Orion's Belt is also slightly offset from the other two, but the connection is even more precise than that. Because the stars in the sky do not stay in the same place forever, over thousands of years, they slowly drift across the sky because of the Earth's slow wobble, which is called precession. Using modern computer programs, Robert Bovell was able to turn back time and see what the sky looked like in the past. He discovered that there was only one moment in history when the three pyramids on the ground perfectly aligned with the three stars of Orion's Belt in the sky. And that moment was around the year 10,500 BCE, or more than 12,000 years ago. This ancient date was so shocking that many scientists refused to believe it, until another piece of evidence was found, not in the sky, but in the rock itself. Next to the pyramids sits the Great Sphinx, a giant statue with the body of a lion and the head of a human, a geologist, who is a scientist that studies rocks. Named Dr. Robert Schoch examined the Sphinx very closely. He saw that the deep grooves and weathering patterns on the body of the Sphinx, and on the walls of the pit it was carved from, were vertical, running from top to bottom. This kind of erosion, he explained, is not caused by wind and sand, which creates horizontal, smooth patterns. Instead, these deep vertical channels could only have been carved by thousands of years of heavy, sustained rainfall. The problem is that this area of Egypt is a desert and has been extremely dry for the last 5,000 years. The last time there was enough rain at Giza to cause this type of damage to the stone was at the end of the last Great Ice Age, around the same time as 10,500 BCE. Two different fields of science, astronomy and geology, were pointing to the exact same, impossible date. This suggests the Giza monuments are not 4,500 years old, but are much, much older. And this leaves us with the biggest question of all. If the ancient Egyptians did not build them, then who were these master scientists who lived on Earth so long ago? The portrait of the nameless scientists. So, if the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx were created more than 12,000 years ago, who were the mysterious people with the incredible knowledge to build them? Graham Hancock does not believe these builders were aliens or came from another planet. He believes they were human beings, just like us. He suggests that they were part of a lost chapter in human history, a highly advanced civilization that existed on Earth during the last Great Ice Age. According to the official story of history, all humans at that time were simple hunter-gatherers, living in small tribes and using basic stone tools. But Hancock argues that this picture is wrong, and that one of these groups became something far more developed. They were master builders, expert sailors who could navigate the oceans, and brilliant astronomers who understood the movements of the stars. This lost civilization was the one that surveyed the entire Earth and gathered the precise data that was later encoded into the Great Pyramid. if this advanced civilization existed. Where did it go? And why are there no records of it? Hancock explains that their world was completely destroyed by a terrible global disaster that happened around 12,800 years ago, a catastrophe that marked the end of the Ice Age. Evidence for this event can now be found by geologists all over the world, suggesting a massive comet may have hit the Earth, causing enormous floods, earthquakes, and a rapid change in the climate that wiped out millions of animals and destroyed almost everything that had been built. But a few people survived this great disaster, and they carried the precious knowledge of their lost world with them. They traveled across a changed planet, finding the small groups of other, more primitive survivors, and they tried to pass on their knowledge of science, agriculture, and architecture. The evidence for this lost civilization is not only found in Egypt, in another country, Turkey. There is a place called Göbekli Tepe, which is the oldest stone temple in the world. Scientists have dated this site, and it was also built around 12,000 years ago, at the same time as the Giza date pointed to by the stars. Göbekli Tepe is a collection of massive, T-shaped stone pillars arranged in large circles, many of them covered in complex carvings, and the site is so large and complicated that it should not have been built by simple hunter-gatherers, just like the Giza pyramids. Its pillars are also aligned to specific star patterns. This physical evidence is also supported by hundreds of ancient myths and legends from all around the world, from South America to India, which all tell a similar story of a great flood that destroyed the world, and of wise teachers, or gods, who arrived afterwards to teach the survivors how to start civilization again. Graham Hancock believes that the Great Pyramid was the most important legacy of these survivors, a permanent message in stone designed to last forever. This creates a clear and compelling picture of who these nameless scientists were. They were the last members of a forgotten human civilization. But if the evidence for this lost chapter of human history is so clear, and can be found in different parts of the world, why is it not taught in our schools and accepted by mainstream scientists? The battle to protect the timeline. If the evidence for a lost chapter of human history is so strong, and can be found in the stars, in the rocks, and in ancient buildings around the world, then we must ask a very important question. Why is this idea not accepted by most mainstream scientists? And why is it not taught in our schools, according to Graham Hancock? The answer is not simple, because it involves a very powerful and protected idea, the official timeline of human history. This official timeline is the story that all of us have been taught, and it is built like a straight line that always moves forward and upward. The story begins with simple hunter-gatherers with stone tools, who then learn how to farm, which allows them to build villages. And then those villages grow into the first great cities and civilizations like ancient Egypt and Sumeria. In this story, progress is always happening, and our modern civilization is at the very top of this long, straight line of development. Graham Hancock's theory does not just add a new piece to this story. It completely breaks the line. His idea suggests that history is not a straight line at all. It is more like a circle, with great civilizations rising up to incredible heights of knowledge, and then completely collapsing back down again into a dark age after a global disaster. If there was a highly advanced scientific civilization on Earth during the Ice Age, it means that our own civilization is not the first to reach this level, and that history can go backwards as well as forwards. This is a very big problem for mainstream scientists, because their entire understanding of the past is built on this idea of a straight line of progress. To accept Hancock's theory would mean that generations of experts have been wrong about the most fundamental story of humanity, and that many history books would have to be completely rewritten. This is why, Hancock argues, new discoveries at Giza that challenge the official story are often ignored or even actively covered up. For example, in 1993, A German robotics engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink sent a small robot that traveled up a long, narrow shaft inside the Great Pyramid. At the end, it found a small stone door with copper handles, a door that had been sealed for thousands of years. This was an incredible discovery, but instead of being celebrated, the Egyptian authorities took control of the project and blocked Gantenbrink from doing any more research. More recently, in 2017, scientists used a new technology with special particles called muons to scan inside the pyramid, and they found a massive hidden empty space above the Grand Gallery. This empty space is huge, as large as a passenger airplane, but it is completely hidden inside the pyramid. Again, this was a world-changing discovery, but there has been no official follow-up expedition to send a camera inside or to explore what this giant secret room might be. The battle, Hancock says, is not about finding the truth. It is about protecting the accepted timeline. And this brings us to the final and most important part of our big question. If the pyramid was a message, why was it left in Giza? The immortal legacy. So we arrive at the final and most important piece of the puzzle. The last part of our big question: if this lost civilization wanted to send a message to the future, why did they choose to build the Great Pyramid? And why did they build it at Giza? The answer, Graham Hancock explains, is because they faced the biggest challenge imaginable. They had to create a message that could survive for more than 10,000 years. A message that could last through floods, earthquakes, wars, and the complete collapse of entire societies. They needed a way to preserve their most important knowledge so that it would not be lost forever, as their own world had been. First, they had to think about how to write the message. They could not write it down in books or on scrolls, because paper and papyrus are very weak materials that can easily burn in a fire or rot away with water and time. They also could not simply pass the information down as a spoken story from generation to generation, because stories always change a little bit every time they are told, and the precise scientific numbers would quickly become corrupted and meaningless. So, they chose to write their message in the only language that is truly universal and never changes, the language of mathematics and science. The size of the Earth will always be the same. The value of pi will always be the same, and the stars will always move in the same predictable cycles. They knew that any future civilization that became advanced enough in science would be able to read and understand this language. Next, they had to choose what to build the message with. They needed a material that was so strong and so durable that it could survive almost anything. They chose stone, and they chose to build with it on a scale that the world had never seen before. They built a structure that was so massive, so heavy, and so perfectly engineered that it would be almost impossible to destroy. They created an artificial mountain, a permanent marker on the face of the Earth, and they chose the location of Giza for a very specific reason, because it is a very stable and solid limestone plateau, in a part of the world that is geologically very quiet. With very few earthquakes, the dry desert climate was also perfect for preserving stone for an incredibly long time. The Great Pyramid was not a message meant for the ancient Egyptians who came thousands of years later. It was a message in a bottle, thrown into the great ocean of time, and it was meant for us. The proof that Graham Hancock presents is not just about a different version of the past. It is a message for our present, the final. Stunning conclusion is that we are not the first advanced scientific civilization to live on this planet. We are simply the first one in a very long time to become advanced enough to finally read the immortal legacy that was left behind for us.